200 BC, 3695 AM. Rome makes war against Philip V of Macedon, lasting until 197 BC. This is 576 of the Greek Olympiad calendar, and 138 years after Philip II of Macedon, father of Alexander, becomes supreme over Athens and Thebes and the other Greek states in 338 BC. 197 BC, 3698 AM. This year ends the Macedonian War between Rome and Philip V. Also, Rome annexed the eastern and southern coastal regions of Spain, sending only a small force to occupy what they believed was going to be a peaceful takeover. Initially, the Romans were well received because they were seen as liberators, freeing the populace from Carthaginian influence. But Roman oppression followed and soon had Iberia, Spain, in revolt. The nearby Celtiberians of the unoccupied territories outside Roman jurisdiction, aiding as hordes of Celts offered their arms against Rome. Strabo recorded that in this year the volcano on Thera erupted, this same volcano being the one that blew apart the island in 1447 BC, covering Egypt in volcanic ash. This was 552 years after 749 BC, when the Romans kidnapped many Sabine women, the Sabines being Gauls, Celts, akin to those of Iberia that the Romans were now at war with. This was 460 years after the ruling families of Corinth migrated in exile to Macedon in 657 BC, this being the end of the Roman war against Macedon and Philip V. Interestingly, in 1565 BC, the people of northern Africa attacked Italia, this being 684 years before 881 BC, when the Israelites built their capital city Samaria, origin of Cimmerians. Counting another 684 years after this was the year 197 BC, when Rome made war against the descendants of the Cimmerians called the Celts. 195 BC, 3700 AM. The Romans continually searched for Hannibal, their most wanted enemy. Hannibal flees North Africa for Asia. The famous Rosetta Stone is sculpted in the reign of Ptolemy V of Egypt, a trilingual inscription discovered in 1799 AD by Napoleon Bonaparte's men. It was because of this trilingual inscription that scholars were able to translate the difficult Egyptian hieroglyphics. 1. The Poisoned King. 2. Historical Deception. 191 BC, 3704 AM. Hannibal was given asylum in the court of Antiochus III of Syria, a Seleucid dynasty king founded by Macedonia. At the advisement of Hannibal, Antiochus invades Greece, knowing this to be an act of war against Rome, but the Syrian armies met with a disastrous defeat at Thermopylae. This was 144 years after 335 BC, when the Macedonian army razed the Greek city of Thebes to the ground and sold off the citizens as slaves, and 288 years after 479 BC, when the Greeks slaughtered the invading Persian army at Plataea. As the Romans are victorious over the Assyrians, a people thoroughly mixed with Israelite blood, this was 666 years before the fall of Rome in 476 AD. 1. The Poisoned King. 189 BC, 3706 AM. Antiochus III of Syria and his military advisor Hannibal of Carthage are defeated by the Romans at Magnesia, south of Pergamon. Hannibal is invited to Bithynia. Many of those fighting on the side of Syria and Asia Minor were Celts, Gauls, and the original settlers of Asia Minor were descended from Israelites. This was 414 years after the Cimmerians settled in the Balkans in 603 BC, the year Babylon captured Jerusalem. This was 396 years after the Babylonians totally destroyed Jerusalem and the Temple. This was also 124 of the Seleucid calendar of Syria, or 1488 months. This was 90 years after the Celts allied themselves to Bithynia and the Romans were defeated at Osculum by Pyrrhus of Epirus in Italy in 279 BC. 179 BC, 3716 AM. Rome subdues the Celtiberians and ends their aid to the Iberian resistance, though Celtiberia itself remains free of Roman occupation. This was 1460 years after Manasseh and Ephraim were adopted into the family of Israel. Ephraim being those Israelites that migrated further west, and Iberia was the further west anyone at this time could go in Europe. This was the 330th year of Rome, 3960 months being 792 times 5. 175 BC, 3720 AM. Antiochus Epiphanes IV becomes king of Syria, a tyrant diabolically opposed to Judaism. As a regent of the Macedonian Seleucid dynasty, Antiochus IV sought to Hellenize the entire domain under his rule, including Judea. His dynastic dream was to subdue his Egyptian rivals, the Macedonian Ptolemaic dynasty. In the prophetic book of Daniel, Antiochus IV is the king of the north, who wages war against the king of the south, Egypt. The first year of this rule was the 138th year of the Greek-Syrian Seleucid calendar that began in 313 BC. 174 BC, 3721 AM. After 66 years orbiting the Sun, the remnants of the ancient Earth-killer comet group passed back over the ecliptic, beginning in 193 BC. The train scattering and the group never being seen again as a strewn field. In this, the 19th and final year of the passing of the train of debris, during the Roman consulship of Spurius Postumius and Quintus Mucius, two suns appeared in midday. This would have been a locally passing object reflecting the sun's brilliant light. 1 Pliny, Natural History, Universe and the World. 171 BC, 3724 AM. In this year the Romans invade Greece, initiating the Third Macedonian War. This is 1080 years after the founding of the Danaan dynasty of Mycenae in the Peloponnesus, an Israelite people that brought about the culture we call Greek. This was 108 times 10, but counting just 108 years before 171 BC was 279 BC, when the Romans were defeated by Pyrrhus of Epirus near Osculum. Epirus founded by descendants of Israel, a sister kingdom to Macedon. Also in this year, Antiochus IV of Syria invades Egypt, king of the north against the king of the south in prophetic literature, defeating a large Egyptian army at Pelusium. He returned to Syria with much spoil. This was 756 years after the Egyptians in 927 BC sacked Jerusalem and the Temple. This was also the 3500th year, 70 Jubilees, of the Jewish calendar that began in 3671 BC. This was 432 years after 603 BC, when Egypt tried to oppose Babylon over Jerusalem and lost. The high priest Jason at Jerusalem introduced Grecian customs, games, a gymnasium and styles. He enticed the youth of Judea to enjoy Greek lifestyle and fashion, built a tower for these activities, and he neglected the sacrifice in the temple. This enraged the older population, the traditionalists. This occurred 414 years after the fall of Judah, a cursed earth period, and destruction of the Jerusalem and the temple in 585 BC. This occurred 414 years, the cursed earth period, after the fall of Judah and the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in 585 BC. William Dankenbring observes astutely that the people were outraged because the games were performed in the nude and right at the temple precinct. This began the 2300 days until the cleansing of the temple in 165 BC, prophesied by Daniel.